If you were an infantry soldier going forward in an attack, what might you expect of the medical services? If you were lucky enough to be wounded as soon as you left your trench, you might actually fall back in the trench, or your mates may be able to get you back in the trench. And immediately you would have your wounds dressed. Each soldier would carry within his kit his own field dressing, which was a gauze pad and a length of bandage. Your mates would make sure you're bandaged up quite well. If it's a slight wound, perhaps a bullet wound through a forearm or fingers or something like that, you'd be moved down as a walking wounded soldier through the communication trenches down to various medical stations. The first medical station you would be moved into would be your regimental aid post. That's where your regimental doctor and his orderlies would be stationed. They would then dress the wound. They probably wouldn't take it off. They would probably put more bandaging on, and you'd be moved off again to the advanced dressing station, where the same thing would happen again. The triage system would hereby be sort of set in. Triage means that walking wounded, or if there's a huge battle going on, these places would be choked with wounded. Those who needed to be got out quickly for the sake of their lives would then be medically evacuated. Those less wounded would have to wait, and if you just had a bullet through your forearm or your fingers, then you would probably be the last to go, and you would wait for everyone else to go. But once it was your turn, if you were walking wounded, you would then make your way back down the communication trenches to further medical services at the back. You'd probably end up in a casualty clearing station, which would in fact be a marquee tent or something like that, a number of marquee tents, where the medical services would then properly assess your wound. It would be cleaned and dressed again, and then quite probably you'd be sent off to one of the islands, Mudros, to get better, or possibly to Alexandria or Cairo or even Malta. If the wound was superficial, then you wouldn't be there very long. If, however, your wound was more serious, you lost a hand or something, or a foot, or facial injury that was serious enough for you to be evacuated, then the same thing would apply. If you couldn't actually make your own way down the communication trenches through the medical services, you would have, of course, stretcher bearers. These brave men would be unarmed, and if you were lost in no man's land, they would be behind the attack, coming out to bring in the wounded. They were all, of course, strong men, but don't forget, on the campaign they would have been ill. They would have had dysentery, as everyone else did. Nevertheless, they still would struggle with two men to get you on their stretcher, get you back into the medical services, and then down the communication trenches, and the same thing would happen. But let's not forget that these communication trenches were quite narrow. Guys were going up and down with the attack and supply and all that sort of stuff, and you would be bumped and pushed and probably dropped a few times as well. That's notwithstanding, the guys would do their best to get you out into the medical system. Once you're in the medical system, of course, your wounds are more severe, they are more serious. So perhaps at the advanced dressing station stage, the MO, the medical officer, may be taking off your limb to save your life. You would then be passed back down through the train, of the medical train. You would then be put on ships, and then you would be CASEVAC'd. You'll be a casualty evacuation to Mudros, or perhaps Alexandria or Malta. Your service life would, for all intents and purposes, then be over. You would be repaired, or as best they could, and then you'd be shipped back to Blighty, back to the UK, for complete recovery, and then probably released from the armed forces.
Tell us something about the hospitals that these medical orderlies took you to on the off islands away from Gallipoli.
The medical system. If you were CASEVAC'd, as it were, evacuated to the vast medical facilities we had on Mudros, and also at Alexandria and in Cairo and Malta, of course. These were huge concerns, of course. When you had a major attack going in, thousands and thousands of men would be involved, tens of thousands of men would be involved in the attack, and some of the casualties would be quite awful. The people who staffed these hospitals, of course, were not kind of devoid or not spared the horror that was with the trench lines. Of course, they didn't get shell and shock and stuff. They got a degree of shock. insofar as when they are treating the casualties, you can imagine how that must be when you have an endless stream of very, very badly wounded men. Many of them have been lying out for a few days, quite possibly. They will have gas gangrene wounds, so that the MO, the medical doctor, will have to cut limbs off just to save the lives of these individuals. These vast hospital complexes, of course, were manned by many surgeons. Nurses particularly played their role here. On the islands around, British and Australian nurses would be here in abundance. There will be hundreds and hundreds of them doing their duty and suffering nonetheless with the boys who they are treating. And of course they would have great sympathy for them. There were also nurses on the hospital ships in their hundreds. And we know from reports what a difficult life it was for them when there was an offensive going on. With all the compassion in the world, it won't help you get over the sort of PTSD that you will eventually be affected by, just given the circumstances and the conditions of the boys coming in from the battlefield that need treated by you.